right, good morning, Pork Fest. I apologize for my voice. I was at the New Metal night last night and I blew it out, but here we are. So, as he said, I'm Tom Mannion. In a previous life right out of high school, joined the Marine Corps, and I joined the Marine Corps Infantry very specifically. After 9/11, I wanted to go out there and kill the people that attacked us, right? I never got a chance to even set foot in Afghanistan. I went to Iraq twice instead, and that kind of formulated my anti-war perspective on the world and brought me to where I am today, filing legislation like this that should help end the war machine. So, what is Defend the Guard? I think you all know, but just for posterity and for online, it's a nationwide effort for the states to assert their power through Article 10, the 10th Amendment, saying that our militia belongs to us, and we are going to withhold them unless Congress does their job, which is to formally declare war. Congress has not formally declared war since World War II. Since then, we've been doing all kinds of either, they call it either a police action, or since Vietnam, that's been these authorizations for use of military force. The militia clause in the Constitution states, the Congress shall have the power to provide for the calling forth of the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Nothing in there says to go to foreign combat, to be sent into Iraq, sent to Syria, sent to Afghanistan, or, God forbid, Iran. So what it doesn't do, and this is pretty important because people will come up and testify against this, and we've heard it in all the states that this thing's been filed. They start saying, oh, well, then what if we want to send them to the border? What if we want to use them to actually literally suppress insurrections or riots? And it's like, it doesn't stop any of this. So it cannot stop overseas training. That's actually from a Supreme Court ruling. We know that this won't work. That's what's per pitch versus DOD. It doesn't affect deployments to the border. So if you want to send your state militia down to Arizona, Texas, whatever, help with border enforcement, that's fully within the powers that we can't stop. It doesn't stop efforts like the COVID response. As much as we didn't like the COVID response, it doesn't stop that at all. It doesn't hinder the support operations like mid-air refueling. That's a big one from New Hampshire because they always talk about our airfield. We have a Pease airfield with a big-ass mid-air refueler. If there was combat operations in Europe and we were refueling over the Atlantic, it doesn't actually stop that either. And it doesn't stop activations to quell riots like we're seeing in LA. So war declarations, this is I touched on this a bit ago. We have not declared war since 1942. Like, it's crazy. You think of all the things that we've done since then. Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War, Kosovo. We've been in Iraq again. We're back in Iraq for a third time. Afghanistan. Everything we've done in Yemen, the bombings in Somalia. The list goes on. It's insane. So the War Powers Act was something they did that Congress passed after Vietnam because they believed that the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that they passed for the Vietnam War was too broad. Come to find out, this thing is insanely broad, especially the one that they passed in 2001. So after 9/11, everybody felt, and Congress felt, we need to do something. We need to go after these terrorists. And it's phrased so broadly that it allows them to, they've been in, I think over 24 countries, there has been military operations under the guise of the 2001 AUMF. But it's been invoked. Like, what's insane here, I'll get back to that. So it's like in 2002, they passed the Iraq invasion. This was the Iraq one. And then it's like all attempts to repeal both of these have failed. In one chamber or another. So it'll get filed in the Senate, pass the Senate, fail in the other chamber. And this has ping-ponged back and forth over several different Congresses. And the scary thing about this is the AUMFs are actually an abdication. They basically handed a constitutionally assigned power to Congress, to the executive, without a constitutional amendment. If you were thinking anything else, like whether confirmation of Supreme Court justices and something like that, like imagine if Congress is just like, the president can confirm their own justices. That's basically what we're seeing here with AUMFs, because what it allows the president to do is to initiate a military action in whatever state or whatever country that they want, and then all they have to do is go back to Congress and ask for the funding. And most of the time, the attitude, especially when the news media and the propaganda gets behind it, they're like, oh, well, you can't just leave our men out there hanging. We got to pass something. We already have boots on the ground. They've been there for 60 days. We have to do something. So that's usually the pressure that gets behind it, and then the congressman usually, vote it through. Oh, okay, so the different activations. This is actually pretty important. So there's three different activations that the Guard have. They have Title 10, Title 32, and then a state activation. Title 10 is the only thing we are touching. That is a federal activation for a federal mission, and very specifically for any kind of overseas deployment to combat zones. It doesn't touch Title 32, which is a federal activation, but a state mission, and it doesn't touch state missions, which would be like disaster response, under the control of the governor. So this is why Defend the Guard became important. Dan McKnight, who runs Bring Our Troops Home, was actually in the Idaho National Guard, and he was activated during the Hurricane Katrina, all the way up in Idaho. They had to deploy him down into New Orleans because the two closest units, the one in Louisiana and the one in Alabama, Mississippi, they both were deployed to Iraq and Kuwait at the time. During the peak of the Iraq War, over 50% of the personnel on the ground were National Guardsmen. And think about that. That's like, we are leaving ourselves vulnerable at home to send these people to nation build in a war that was based on a lie. And the real scary thing is one of those units in I think it was Alabama or Mississippi, they had a bunch of equipment that was very specifically for engineering, like building bridges and building dams, that would have been extremely helpful had that material not been in Iraq doing that mission there instead. So think of the amount of lives that we lost. There's been multiple generals on record saying, had those units been available, we could have saved hundreds, maybe who the hell knows, like so many lives. These are other problems that have cropped up just in the last 5 years, right? So the Texas deep freeze, they were missing their unit. The border crisis currently, if you guys remember, when Governor Abbott was trying to send his guardsmen to the border to enforce the border on his own under Biden, Biden threatened to just activate and deploy his unit. He's like, no, we're just going to take your National Guardsmen and send them elsewhere because we don't want them at the border, which is insane. It's like, oh, we're going to send them to Syria, and they're probably going to die over there, but we don't want to enforce the border. The Florida stand-up of the State Guard, they created their own state militia that is doesn't answer to the federal government whatsoever. Actually, when Governor DeSantis was coming around and he was campaigning for the presidential primary, I spoke to him, and he said that that was basically in response to this exact same problem. The amount of times that Florida gets clobbered with a hurricane and the Guard units just aren't available, it just kept happening time and time again. So he had to stand up his State Guard. I don't know if you guys remember. It was kind of like a hoopla from the left where they're like, oh, he has his own personal army, but it's just in response to this federal overreach. So the New Hampshire, this actually offended me quite a bit. It should offend everybody. So the New Hampshire, these HIMARS batteries, if you heard about them in the Ukraine, they're like those big rocket launchers, and they are used for artillery. We actually had our HIMARS batteries being used as a demo for the Saudis in Kuwait. So we deployed our unit over there, and it was basically they're acting like car salesmen for the military industrial complex, where they're just showing off these HIMARS, trying to sell them to our allies. I don't know about you guys, but when I enlisted, I didn't enlist to be a salesman for the military industrial complex. I'm sure those boys that are on those HIMARS batteries feel the exact same way. The Hawaii and California wildfires, the Hawaii ones that was one of the ones where they barely missed it. Those guys came back a week prior to those fires happening. They would have not had their National Guard when those wildfires broke out either if the timing was just slightly off. And then Hurricane Helene. So that tore through, if you remember, it went up through Appalachia, and there's still people right now that I think are still in need of help, and it's in western North Carolina and Tennessee. The Tennessee one is particularly bad because they had a 100-man unit, an infantry unit in the eastern Tennessee that was deployed the week prior to Helene hitting, so they weren't there to help. This is just compounding evidence of just why we need the Guard here at home. So, Syria, this one's big. So, every time we bring up the AUMFs, we have these generals and these high-ranking officers come in, and they're like, well, the AUMF process, it's kind of like a war declaration. And the 2001 AUMF, that covers pretty much everything we're doing right now, except when you think about Syria. So, they tried to pass an AUMF specifically for Syria so that we can intervene. It failed. It never passed. We never passed an AUMF to get involved in Syria. So since then, a bunch of the lawyers at the DOD, kind of it was during Obama, they were like, oh, well, this ISIS thing has spilled over into Iraq, so we can kind of use the 2002 AUMF. And then once we kind of got rid of ISIS and they weren't really in Iraq anymore, that didn't really make any sense. So now they're arguing from it's still the 2001 AUMF because of terrorism and all that. Except, what's bizarre is that these moderate rebels that we trained are Al-Qaeda. So if we have this 2001 AUMF that was designed, and the wording is very specific about destroying the enemies of the United States and those who attacked us on 9/11, why are we supporting, using this AUMF, the very people that the AUMF was passed to destroy? It blows my mind. And so it falls apart. And like right now, literally, the guy who's in charge of Syria right now, if you're not familiar, if you guys don't listen to Scott Horton, you really should. But the guy who's running this thing right now is Abu Muhammad al-Jalani. This dude was in Iraq when I was in Iraq, and he was shooting at guys like me. We detained him, and until December of this year, he had a $10 million bounty from the United States. And then once we basically allowed him to come into power, once that happened, we just kind of forgot about that little bounty. So Tower 22, this is spillover from Iraq. So in northern Jordan, on the Iraq, Syria and Jordan border, is this air base called Tower 22. Lots of times, the states themselves don't necessarily know where their units are going. We hear stuff like, the New Hampshire National Guard, they're going to Kuwait. That's a lie. That's just the first stopover. They then deploy to somewhere else in country, whether it be Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq or this place, Tower 22. This was to support the Al-Tanf blockade, which is on this main supply route between Damascus and pretty much Iran, which is, why we're blockading this at all. It definitely helped topple that's why when I say when we supported Al-Qaeda, it's because we supported the fall of the Assad regime. So on January 28th of last year, there was airstrikes from the Iraq side into Tower 22 because it's right across the border. These drone strikes killed 3 Army reservists, and it killed 47 others, including over 20 National Guardsmen from 4 different states. Now, the scary thing here, specifically for New Hampshire, is the New Hampshire Guard had just returned from this base. They had just come back like weeks prior. I tried to get confirmation. I asked the Deputy Adjutant General, I was like, did we have men at this base when it was under attack? And he was just like, I can't confirm or deny, blah, 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 like all the legalese. But then I heard through the Lance Corporal Underground, which is like a back channeling of the lower enlisted through guys that were there. They're like, oh, no, we were at that base. We were there 2 weeks before this attack happened. So it could have been our men, the New Hampshire Guardsmen, like coming back in boxes in support of Al-Qaeda. Oh, a little map here. So just show you how close this is. You have Syria over here with Damascus, and then you have that little red pin. That's the Tower 22. It's supporting Al-Tanf. So another thing about Al-Tanf, we're currently in negotiations right now with the nation of Syria, with that Al-Qaeda head who rebranded himself, to have a permanent base in Al-Tanf. And way in northeastern Syria, we were also guarding oil fields. They came under attack like a year before that. Every time I do this presentation, there's some ridiculous catastrophe, foreign policy wise, that happens in the world. So I'm already out of date by the time I file this damn thing. Iran just happened after I already made this. Counter arguments. So this is the crap we hear all the time from these generals that they roll in. The first thing they're going to say is the Montgomery Amendment, which was challenged with the Perpich versus DOD. This one says that the amendment says, so the Title 10, that governor cannot withhold consent for the purposes of location, timing, purpose, et cetera, for things that the governor cannot withhold consent. However, the consent component, which is 12301 Section F, I believe, or no, Section D. 12301 Section D wasn't removed. If they wanted to remove the ability for the governors to withhold consent, why wouldn't the amendment just remove the consent entirely? Instead, they just very specifically said, well, we didn't want people to stop, because at the time, governors were withholding their troops from going to Central America for training. No one's ever challenged whether the National Guard should go to combat. This Perpich ruling was very specifically about sending, I believe it was the Montana or one of the Dakotas. Minnesota. It was the Minnesota governor was trying to withhold his guys because he didn't want his guys going to Central America for training. DOD said you cannot withhold consent for that. The biggest other argument is this federal funding thing, which if you've ever heard a state house like hearing when they start talking about, when you have like the executive departments come in, they start, there's a bill they don't like. They're gonna say, well, it might put federal funding at risk. And it's like, what do you mean by risk? And what federal funding? Especially like if you guys know anything about the car inspections thing right now, like we're trying to get rid of that. They talk about the damn, it's like the EPA requirements for like the emissions tests. Like that doesn't even apply to our state anymore, but they're still in there hawking this crap. So we have a humongous fiscal note that's attached to this bill every time we filed it. And it's like $400 million of quote unquote like federal funding that we would lose. However, as we've seen with DOGE, the executive cannot just unilaterally stop spending money on things. Like that's better for, for better or for worse. It's definitely for worse in my opinion. If the executive department doesn't want to spend money Congress gave them, that's great. However, that's not the case. So the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974 was done to force the executive to spend money allocated by Congress. So that means if you want to quote unquote defund the Guard, that has to be an act of Congress. You cannot have the National Guard Bureau just say, oh, well, we're just gonna not give New Hampshire like $400 million because they want us to follow the Constitution. Another one that I found, like in my research, the South Dakota v. Dole was actually about federal highway funds. And while this supports the position that the federal government can withhold some funding for specific projects, it very specifically says the money cannot be coercive, and what we're trying to do with the money cannot be unconstitutional. So this, in my opinion, supports our position that it can't be coercive, so they can't completely defund the Guard, and they can't really tell us that, well, we want you to continue doing this unconstitutional thing and try to leverage that, in my opinion. Pease Airport. This is a New Hampshire specific defend the Guard thing. This isn't. But if you hear the hearings from every damn state, like I heard the one in Montana, they were talking about like their silos and things like that. Like, well, if we get defunded, they're going to close this critically important base. Pease Airport has an actual dual function. It's actually also used as an international airport. So I reached out to the guy who runs it, the Pease Development Authority, and I got a letter back from their director. He said, the National Guard, in the bizarre scenario where we lose all our funding, the only thing they actually do there, the National Guard, is air traffic control and crash fire rescue. So, and then he said, actually, well, both of those we could take care of, no problem. So there's people on my committee that were like, well, I have a lot of people that work at Pease, like at that airfield, and they're like, if they close down Pease, that's a lot of my constituents. And I was like, well, here you go. Here's this letter. He says that even in the scenario that I don't think is going to happen, you're fine. Your constituents will not lose their job. This has been endorsed by all of our favorites. So we have like Congressman Massey from Kentucky, Gossar from Arizona, and of course Senator Paul from Kentucky. I really wish those people lived up here. They would fit a lot better in this state. Former Congressman Ron Paul has talked about this at great length. The Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, actually endorsed this at Liberty Forum last year. That was fantastic. She had a real frank discussion about it in front of a crowd of all of us. Former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy endorsed it, I believe, here 2 years ago. 2 years ago. Same thing with RFK Jr. endorsed it when he came here 2 years ago. And surprisingly, the Secretary of Defense supports this bill. He was on Fox and Friends after New Hampshire passed this bill, after I gave my speech on the floor and we got it out of the House with a very slim majority. He was on Fox and Friends that following Friday saying, I like this idea. We need to do this. This was long before he was tapped for SecDef, and my understanding through the Bring Our Troops Home is he still supports it. He just has not put out like a statement to that effect after he was endorsed and confirmed. We had people meet with him, so he still supports the premise. I don't know why he hasn't put out a press release that would actually make all of our lives a lot easier. Current status of the New Hampshire Defend the Guard bill. It's retained by my committee. Now, this was kind of like a political move because we're in budget season. The first year is budget season. So if Defend the Guard came to the floor and then we passed it over to the Senate, they would very likely spite kill it or spite amend it with some garbage that they have and kill the bill because we're in budget negotiation season. So I think going forward, I'm always going to file this thing in a second year because I understand the political nature of this. Retained just means that we're holding it for the summer, and we will vote for it in either September or October when we just come together as a committee. We're going to just bang this one out, and the USS Liberty one. We're going to bang them both out. I think I have the votes. I'm almost certain I have the votes. As far as I know, there's one Republican on my committee that's opposed, and I have at least 2 Democrats, and we have a Republican majority, so I think I'm good. However, there are some people that are on the fence. A potential flip here is Mandelbaum. She's from the Seacoast region. She's our clerk. If anybody lives in that area, that'd be great if you reached out to her and say, I still support this, and you said that you supported it on Twitter, and then you kind of backed away from it when you heard that peas thing. If you know this guy here, Wayne Hemingway, he's the Republican on the committee that opposes it. It'd be really cool if you blew up his mailbox. Oh, okay, so that's it. That's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. I can also just ramble about U.S. foreign policy for a long time, but if you have any questions, I'd love you to come forward. Say again? Oh yeah, there's a mic in the center. Does anybody have any questions?
Let me prime this.
Yeah.
So we have some R's on the committee that aren't too enthusiastic. What are some arguments that Wayne has that makes him reluctant to support this right off the bat?
His is all about that federal funding. We've actually had another Republican. Oh, you know what's bizarre? We had during our hearing, there was some former state reps, Republicans. They are the straight through and through neocon types. They're all about the federal funding thing. And there's we had one individual come up that I think I've convinced to at least walk when the vote comes to the floor. He opposed it originally, but I think he believes in it in spirit. There's this thing where they would just move units from base to base instead. Instead of defunding, they'll just kind of take your guys and move them to Massachusetts or whatever your functionality is. However, his argument falls apart because the state that Pisa is kind of a unique airport in our strategic location in the Northeast. There's pretty much only 2 states you can move to, Massachusetts and Maine, if we want to continue with the mid-air refueling over the North Atlantic, which is the purpose of that entire airfield. So the fear here is that, and I think Hemingway echoed this, he's like, well, they're just going to uproot our unit and move it. And it's like, well, that guy that just came and said that they moved his unit, they moved it out of Massachusetts because they couldn't get the personnel. It wasn't a funding thing. It wasn't a not listening thing. They literally didn't have the people to do the job in Massachusetts. So they moved a unit for that purpose. And it's like, well, okay, so how are you going to move the unit back to a place where they already don't have the people? That doesn't make any damn sense. So it limits it to Maine, and I'm not sure what they have for airfields to support that KC-130.
I have 2 questions. I'm from Virginia, and I hadn't been keeping up carefully with what was going with Defend the Card there, but my understanding was it almost passed in Virginia.
Yeah.
That's one question. And the second question is, I would love to hear you riff on what's happening with Iran right now and what you think, where we're headed with that.
Okay, so the first one, Virginia, it passed out of the House in Virginia unanimously. I'm not sure if they have a consent calendar like our state does, which basically means every bill that came out of committee unanimous goes on this docket that we vote on at the beginning of session, and it basically blanket passes everything on the docket, pass or fail, whatever the recommendation from the committee is, so there's no debate. That's what I think happened in Virginia. I don't know how they managed that, but it got on consent and passed. It was 100% out of the Virginia House. It's incredible. The Senate, of course. So another thing about New Hampshire that's unique is every bill gets 2 hearings, bare minimum, right? So you're going to get one out of the House if it passes, and you're going to get one in the Senate if we get it out of the House, right? So, and you will get those hearings. In other states, they could do what's called a pocket veto, where the Speaker or the President of the Senate could just take the bill and just never bring it forward, never assign it to a committee, never give it to allow the people to come and speak. I think that might have happened in Virginia in the Senate, if I'm not mistaken. I have to look that back up. But now Iran. So if Iran goes the way that Syria went, they're going to lie to us, as they have for all these wars. It's either going to be false flag, which I don't know, but I mean, that's speculation. But what's more likely to happen, and if you saw that Ted Cruz interview with Tucker Carlson, he basically kind of let it slip that we were already technically engaged in Iran. And he's like, oh, no, I mean, Israel's doing it, and we're just kind of purporting support. But it kind of implied that we had already dropped bombs. I don't know how true that is, but that's kind of what happens with Syria. In Syria, they said, oh, we're not going to get involved. We're not going to do anything there. We're just going to train the moderate rebels. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe we're providing a little bit of air support because, there's terrorist cells in there. Never mind that one of the terrorist cells is Al-Qaeda that we're supporting. And then it kind of ended up being like a boil the frog slowly, because if you remember, we never passed an AUMF. Then all of a sudden we're hearing about we have special forces on the ground. They've been like training the rebels. So we technically have boots on the ground, but it's just special forces. And it's like, okay, well, there's an active army unit that's defending the Kurds in the northeast. So it's just we don't want anything bad to happen to the Kurds. They're our allies. So we have boots on the ground in the northeast. We also have a base in Al-Tanf where we're blockading supplies, but it's supplies coming from Iran. We can't let that happen. So it's okay. And then it turned into like full-blown, the National Guard makes up 50% of the units sitting in Syria. And then we're just going to sit there for indefinitely. Oh, and now we're going to make a deal with the terrorist leader of Syria to leave units there forever. I have a feeling if Iran does that slow boil the frog thing, they saw that it was successful. The American people kind of were asleep at the wheel, and we just kind of have been involved in Syria. And it just kind of happened over the course of 10 years, and it's insane. And, I know Trump declared victory over ISIS, but it didn't end. He didn't pull all the people out of Syria. There was a lot of talk about pulling people out of Syria. They're only now thinking about pulling people out of the Northeast because they're going to make a deal with the terrorist. So.
Good morning. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
With respect to the reserve and the leverage that creates on politicians, because I understand the distinction here between Title 32 and some of the the dictates that the Guard gets put on them by the feds. Don't you think that having reserve units in districts and federal funding behind that and jobs, does that have any impact on how people perceive this and the way that votes go, since it's kind of it's not well understood, I think, in the public, the difference?
Yeah, well, that's with a threat, right? So they always come in and they say, we're going to lose jobs, they're going to move the unit, and that's like uprooting an entire family. And then it's like whenever you move a unit, if you know anything about when there was this thing called BRAC, it was base reallocation and closure. This was something they've been doing for decades. They actually stopped it, the BRAC stuff, back in, I think it was the National Defense Authorization Act, either in 14 or 16. They said, we're not going to do any more rounds of this, because what it ends up doing is you have a base that's kind of in the middle of nowhere, Alabama or something, and the entire town is kind of supporting that base. So if you move the base, it doesn't just move the reserve unit or whatever it is, it actually kills the town because nobody's working there anymore. Thankfully, New Hampshire is not kind of that same way. Where our guys are already populous areas like Portsmouth and Concord. However, and that was another argument that we were saying, they can't use BRAC to move the bases. The only way they can really justify it is they'd have to make up something else, they didn't have personnel ready for mission, or whatever it may be. And that'll be their excuse if they try to do it. And then we could sue. And this is actually, if you think about it, this is kind of what we're getting at with the entire Defend the Guard. It's more than just keeping the lives of our men safe. It's actually, we want to spark a challenge, because we do not believe AUMFs, the authorizations for use of military force, are valid war declarations. We want to spark this challenge. No one's doing it. No one's done it. And we should really, very specifically challenge the 2001 AUMF for everything that's been used outside of Afghanistan and fighting Al-Qaeda. Because it's also been used, we used it in Yemen right now, where we're bombing the Houthis. And the Houthis, if you don't know this, the Houthis are actually on the opposite side from Al-Qaeda there as well. So by us bombing the Houthis, we're once again helping Al-Qaeda there. And when we destabilized Libya, we fractured the country into a civil war that is also helping ISIS and Al-Qaeda by helping them try to take chunks of the country. And that, I don't think that was the objective, and we're not fighting specifically for that purpose. Whereas in Syria, we are very specifically helping these terrorists take over because we didn't want Assad in power. And this, when it came to Gaddafi, I think they just killed him and they just let the country go to crap, hell in a handbasket. And if you think about it, when it comes to the Iran thing, it's the outcomes are what? So we go in, we nation build, and then it falls to crap either spectacularly like Afghanistan, where it literally reverts back to the way it was before, or you have stuff like Libya, Syria, and Iraq, where it becomes a massive civil war where everybody's just killing each other, and like the loss of life gets into the potentially millions. Like the figures for Iraq are murky, but they're saying like minimum 500,000 people, civilians, died in Iraq through our intervention.
What are we doing in Somalia now? I just had a friend deployed from New Mexico.
Somalia? Well, I mean, Somalia has just always been a hellhole since like as far back as like before I was born. So, for a while in Somalia, we were drone striking allegedly Al Qaeda people there, but it's like kind of like a failed state, right? So, what we're doing there is God knows. But yeah, it's like drone striking alleged Al Qaeda operatives and whatever civilians are near them at the time.
Thank you very much. A very interesting talk. I wonder if you could spend a little bit of time to discuss the incentives for the federal government deploying the Guard overseas versus regular U.S. Army and those branches. It's not obvious to me that deploying the Guard is worth the trouble. Certainly there seems to be some hurdles that have to be overcome, yet it seems to be so common. So that disconnect, isn't obvious to me.
That's a fantastic question, actually. And part of it is it's like a budget cutting measure, if you think about it, because if you have an active Army unit, active Marines, whatever it is, they're housed on Camp Lejeune. You have to pay for that. You have to give them housing, give them everyday food, everyday training, because they're on the job 24/7 doing stuff active duty. If you have like a reserve unit, it's kind of like similar, but except they show up to train. And then if you have a National Guard unit, it's even worse because the state is footing a good chunk of the bill. Granted, it may be through federal funding, but anytime it comes to like state activations and things like that, that's on us. That's on like the taxpayers of New Hampshire if we do any kind of disaster relief. So in the background, these units are just sitting there getting paid for by the states and then get stood up for federal activation, get paid for with federal money and all that stuff. So they're kind of just sitting there as like a budget item. And like the federal government has seen this as like an untapped resource. During the Iraq War, they were, there was lots of talk about the draft, and they had this thing called stop loss, which is like Army guys were trying to like finish out their 4-year contract, and they're like, no, you got to stay. So that was like step one, and then when they realized that wasn't going to give them enough people, they're like, well, we could just deploy the Guard. Like we'll just activate them. They're technically part of the Army, right? When we stand them up, they become like an Army unit, and like, I don't mean to besmirch, so I was in the Marine Corps Infantry. There's rivalry between the branches, but there's something I gotta say. So like, when I took over for an Army unit on my second deployment, I overheard their company commander, as soon as we showed up, it was like the middle of the day, we sent a patrol out. The Army commander was just like, you guys are gonna send a deployment, or a squad out during the day? And I was like, you guys aren't? So like you basically letting the terrorists, like these Al-Qaeda guys just like put roadside bombs in broad daylight because you guys aren't patrolling. So like the different mindsets, and then you have like the National Guardsmen who are trained to like be citizen soldiers here at home, here for disaster relief and stuff like that. They don't even have like the necessarily urban combat training to the same like proficiency as like an active Army, active Marine Corps unit. And honestly, that could cost lives. Like not just the guy that screws up, but like his entire squad mates, right? He's just not paying attention. He didn't have a good enough training for like clearing corners or whatever it is. So I think it's just like we're putting these guys out there that are, in my opinion, somewhat undertrained for what the mission is, and it's just a cost-cutting measure from the federal government.
So just to maybe color in some detail on that question, the reason the Guard is utilized a lot is the Guard, there's combat soldiers, combat support, and combat service support. Well, the Guard is primarily made up of combat and combat support. So your infantry, and then your engineering, your CAV squadrons and things like that. And that's why they're getting sent out to do the dirty work. Whereas the reserves, there's no combat arms in the reserve. I think there's one reserve unit that has any combat arms capability. So the reserve is more your combat service support, so your logistics, your medical, and things like that. So, the Guard is the primary support for the federal government for the hammer, or wherever they want to drop the hammer.
And there's a lot of them, right? So it's like every state has their units. to that, like we have a HIMARS battery, right? So like that's artillery. Are we ever going to use it on our soil to fire at Canada? Like it's going to get deployed to combat. That's its purpose. I mean, that's, I don't think that should be its purpose, but that's what the federal government has done. It's like New Hampshire has a HIMARS battery. We're going to deploy it to Kuwait. We're going to sell weapons to the Saudis by demoing this piece of hardware. Any other questions? All right, folks, thank you so much for coming out. This was fantastic. I'll be around all day.